So my McKinsey experience was profoundly formative. It shaped me in a number of ways which I did not realize at the time. It shaped what kinds of problems I wanted to work on. It shaped how I worked on these problems and how I communicated, all three things. This is good and bad. It made my academic journey an uphill struggle. On the other hand, the path took me to perches and overlooks which are remote from where everybody else is going. Three things are absolutely germane. The first is McKinsey focused on problems of considerable importance to top management. And it did not at the time work on technical issues, small technical issues. These are not statistical problems, nor are these mathematical problems. And therefore, they demand a kind of reasoning that is suited to what I would call one-offs. You cannot apply statistics to get a cogent or reasonable answer to a one-off or to a unique situation. You have to pay a great deal of attention to context. The academic in the natural sciences is looking for general solutions and general explanations which abstract away from time and place. They're looking at how things work broadly and in general. They privilege quantitative statistical data above contextual data. And the mode of communication also then tends to be statistical and very cut and dried. And at least the pretense is that we do not use narrative mode discourse to communicate what we find. My first big book on entrepreneurship was a study of 100 entrepreneurs in which I looked at their stories in minute detail. And then I told their stories and I interpreted these stories in what I would call narrative mode. There was some data, there was some statistics, but it was not a mathematical analysis. The numbers were auxiliaries to my telling the story of these entrepreneurs. Uncertainty was very much front and center in how I looked at these issues. Uncertainty is something which modern economics and many other social sciences shy away from. The kind of uncertainty that I'm interested in, which is uncertainty about one-offs, is not treatable statistically. My book after that was on finance. I explicitly criticized financial system that had lost track of context, that did not look at individual borrowers, given what they individually could or could not do. They were treated as statistics. And in some cases, this is an efficient way of, for example, extending credit, but it also can lead you very badly astray. And this had and did have serious systemic consequences, which I pointed out in this book. Now, finally, in my old age, I really want to put the spotlight on the method itself, on what it means to take context seriously, to take uncertainty, which I define quite simply as doubts about what is or what could be. So Frank Knight was more than a little bit of an eccentric. He wrote this book, which very, very few people in this world have read, called Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit. And in that book, he made a distinction between uncertainty, where he was talking about uncertainty that arises in one-off situations, which cannot be reduced to a statistical distribution, and risk, which he said can be defined and described as a statistical distribution. And he said where you have risk, what may happen can be described by a probability distribution. You cannot have profit. And I thought it was a very engaging and intuitively obvious account for what makes entrepreneurial ventures profitable or unprofitable. They are dealing with things which cannot be reduced to statistics. In modern finance, you might call that excess profit, but he called it just profit or excess returns. He then went on to become what was considered to be the father of Chicago economics, the old Chicago economics. I have simplified and modernized Knight. So, for example, I very simply said, uncertainty is a mental state. It's a condition of doubt. And it's a condition of doubt about what is. I mean, do I have COVID or do I have a cold? Or it's doubt about what could be, where things haven't happened yet, but could happen this way and could happen in some other way. Reasonable people, reasonable organizations, when faced with one-offs where they cannot calculate, what do they do and what should they do? I use this framework to demonstrate that thinking about this problem then leads you to see many things which you would not ordinarily see if you put on your standard economics hat. You see, for example, why there is a difference between large, well-established companies and the small entrepreneur. You begin to see the value of routines. There is a belief that routines are bad, bureaucracy is bad, but in fact, routines and bureaucracy of a certain sort are invaluable to the dynamic functioning of the large modern enterprise. You also begin to see the value of what I call imaginative discourse, because nobody can undertake a venture on his or her own. You have to secure other people's support. I cannot prove to you by statistics, but I could try to persuade you through narrative mode reasoning. What I'm proposing is plausible. And if plausible, it could lead to a better outcome than if you didn't do this. Uncertainty can be about a variety of things. And so all you have is an inference to a plausible conclusion. That's not the only way you can proceed reasonably in going from the facts, adding in some imagination, relying on analogies which you have relied on in the past. That whole combination one could call judgment. Uncertainty is a prerequisite for the kind of judgment that I'm talking about. And judgment, in turn, is an incredibly productive way for people and organizations to deal with uncertainty in a manner which is inspiring, which is inclusive, and which builds collective commitment to a particular path of action. One is pay attention to routines. Is the optimal design of a decision-making routine that on the one hand demands evidence, but does not demand so much evidence and does not demand so much proof that it is immobilizing. And respect the role and value of imagination as long as this imagination is well grounded in some reality or in some set of beliefs that has been exposed to a reasonable group of people.